I'll just say something about the timing. We've had a delay already. I don't like meetings to go on too long because everybody gets tired and bored. And we've got quite a large number of items. I think some of them won't take very long, but I will try and be encouraging people to restrict how long they talk so that we can make sure we do get to the end in a reasonable time. So the next thing is to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. And the first thing to ask there, if anybody has any corrections to it before we move to approve it. I don't see any, so can I move from the chair that we approve the minutes of this meeting? How do we indicate to vote, Robert?
So if remote attendees would like to use the hand function to indicate support for approving the minutes.
And those here hold your hands up physically. So all those in favour? And can you take a note of how many, Robert? Doesn't have to count them exactly if it's going to be a...
Well, that's clearly carried, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, and well, any against first. And so we'll say carried nem con, is it? Okay, and now, are there any matters arising from the minutes? Again, I'm relying on you, Robert, to tell me if anybody's putting their hand up. No.
We have Sharon Hayes indicating, Mr. Chairman.
Sharon, do you wish to speak then, please?
I'm not aware I was indicating. Don't know what I've pressed that's done that.
Okay, then. Is there anyone else, Robert?
Nick Tomlin.
Dick Tomlin, are you? Is anyone else, Robert?
No, it's not Nick Tomlin. It's Angie Tomlin.
Did you wish to speak?
No, I didn't realise I had to lower the hand. I've worked it out now.
Is anybody indicating they wish to speak who really does want to speak? Are you? Yes, Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. It was just on the demolition of old railway bridges by Highway England, which was a matter of conversation at the last meeting. And officers were going to examine if any bridges no longer in use existed either over or under busy roads in Lincolnshire. We haven't actually identified any. We did do a short amount of investigation. And then we sort of, well, we got distracted onto other things, I'm afraid. But should we come across any, I'll report them back as and when we establish.
Okay. Thank you. Then I can move on to the next item 6, access delivery in Lincolnshire County Council at North East Lincolnshire. I take it we're going to have 2 here, one from Matthew Chaplin and one from you, Chris. So I shall... do I have to choose?
Well, we've got some slides.
Oh, we see whose slide comes up first. Yeah.
Hi everyone, we're just waiting for the slide to come up so I can talk to it, or Matthew if it happens to be about North East Lincolnshire. I'm sure Rob's got it squirreled away somewhere. And it would appear I'm the lucky winner.
Okay,
because
go
that's
ahead.
the Lincolnshire County Council structure. So just as a brief structure chart, that's how we're set up to deal with public rights of way and countryside access. So not only are we dealing with the rights of way network, we're dealing with open access land as defined out of the Countryside and Rights of Way Act. So what was often known as the right to roam land, but also the coastal access land, which we'll be discussing later, and the England Coast Path. So as you can see at the top, with my new moniker of Deputy Head of Environment, is myself. So I'm taking the overview of public rights of way matters and access matters across the county. And then if you look at the structure chart to the left-hand side of it, as you're looking at it, the definitive map team, that's the team that will be looking after the legal mapping of public rights of way on the definitive map and statement, headed up by a lady called Karen Bark. And she has a cohort of officers who will deal with definitive map modification order applications, and then any other changes to the definitive map made by public path order, so diversions, creations and extinguishments and so on, of which we'll talk a little bit about when we're talking about the Deregulation Act later on. And they're supported by one of the Assistant Rights of Way officers, Laura Pickwell. Their work isn't just limited to that. They're often drawn into general questions that we receive from the public about public rights of way, what you can do, where you can go, and those sorts of questions, because we don't have as you can see, we don't have an administrative team as such that would cover some more general issues. So people who would be normally picking up specific items cover various very different things, and are very flexible in that regard. The central column shows you our maintenance and enforcement teams. So we split into 3 separate areas of Lincolnshire. So we have Area A, which is the West Lindsey area, the City of Lincoln area, and North Kesteven area, and that's looked after by Chris Marsh as the senior officer and Matt Sharp as the assistant. Area B, East Lindsey and Boston Borough, with Jonathan Stockdale and Mags Leonard. And then Area C, which is the southern end at South Kesteven and South Holland areas, with Andrew Savage and Andrea Philpotts. And these are the teams that will pick up your day-to-day reports on things on the network that need attention, whether it be from a maintenance point of view and surfacing, stiles and gates, bridges, signposting, waymarking, basically the path infrastructure itself, and they also pick up the enforcement element. So obviously you're probably all aware in this county, arable arable farming affects the network quite regularly, and it is something bread and butter work for us these days. But they will also be dealing with obstructions by structures, fences being erected, electric fences, things just being left over them, spoil heaps, all kinds of things. Anything that might affect the right of way will go to those area teams to resolve in their specific areas. And again, they're supported by a gentleman called Nigel Walton, one of the Assistant Rights of Way officers, just to generally support them. And then finally, we have Debbie Braund on the right-hand side, who is our Countryside Projects Officer. So she's covers a lot of the promotional work we do and assists me with the strategy-led work that we look at, in terms of how we're going to set up and how we're going to progress certain things. So we'll talk later again about the Rights of Way improvement plan. So Debbie will be helping me with that. At the moment, Debbie's engaged with the review of the Viking Way, which is our premier path, which stretches from the Humber Banks at the bridge all the way down to Rutland Water. I can't remember exactly how far that is, but Debbie is currently rewalking it. It's been since 1996 that last project was undertaken, and we were granted some funds last year to go away and review it and make any improvements that we could. So there's a few sort of high token ones, the crossing at Caister Bypass, the crossing at Sedgebrook, I think it is, and some path realignment work as you come into Lincoln. At the moment, you have to come in via the Allenby Road Industrial Estate and over the railway, which is not particularly aesthetic, to get towards the cathedral. So we're looking at different opportunities to come into Lincoln, perhaps a bit further north, and drop down past the cathedral and down through the city. So a bit of route realignment work going on, and also some work on the green lanes at Skillington and Allington, which are quite big issues where they've been decimated by vehicular use, not illegal vehicular use, but decimated by that sort of use, so that they're actually impassable now to most people. So yes, Debbie's going to continue to do that over the next couple of years, working with the senior officers in each of the areas to make those improvements. And that's pretty much it, really.
Okay.
All of them look after the open access side of things as well. What we are looking at, and I'll pick up again in the England Coast Path work, is that we are looking potentially to employ a new officer to act as the National Trails Officer for the Coast Path, but I'll pick that up separately later on. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, before I ask for questions, I've just got a quick one on my own. I understand that you've been having a move of office. Is that completed? Now you've settled into a new one?
Offices, what are they? Predominantly, all offices are now working at home, and I don't actually envisage that will change particularly. We now have the IT infrastructure to allow us to do most of our business from home. Some of the work that I'm doing specifically is integrating the rights of way day-to-day management into the highways operational management, so the usage of in the field tablets to do their work and place works orders, stuff that we're a bit behind on. So actually offices are something that we don't visit very often anymore. The one that we do use is Lancaster House here in Lincoln, just around the corner from where we are in council offices. And we're also looking to move the definitive map team into the archives, but that hasn't happened yet. So
into the archives?
Into the archives building at Rumbold Street, yes. It's not bookable desk systems, so they can come and go as they please, whereas here they can't leave anything out. They have to clear the desks every day. So it's actually a better place for them to go, and we will be taking the definitive map there and putting it as a in the deposits, so it can be called up into the search room by any member of the public, rather than making a booking to come and see it with us.
Okay. Right, now, can we see the people and see if anyone's asking questions?
Miss Sandra Harrison has a question, Mr.
Sandra,
Chairman.
over to you, if you can hear me.
Thank you, Chairman. It was just a request, really. Could we have a copy of this thing that's on the screen at the moment, please? Perhaps you could send it out with the minutes when you produce them, because it's really important that we all have the names of the relevant officers in our areas. It'd be really helpful. Thank you.
So yes, I'll ask Rob to do that, and I'll also include our generic contact details on there as well, so people know how to get hold of us.
Yep. I'll add to that when changes take place, if an update could be sent out, an updated version of that routinely, it shouldn't cost anything if it's done electronically. Has anyone else got any questions? Well, thank you for that one, though, Sandra. No, nobody else got a question? Is Matthew ready with the North East Links one?
Yep, that's me.
Good. Over to you, Matthew.
Okay. Yeah, there's North East Lincolnshire Council, and in 2010, the council decided to outsource the regeneration services it provides, and it formed the North East Lincolnshire Regeneration Partnership at the time with Balfour Beatty, and now it's NG Equans, and possibly going to be called something else in the near future. North East Lincolnshire Council still hold the neighbourhood services, who provide the maintenance of parks, open spaces, verges, and some non-definitive paths in the area. As I said, quite a lot of the regeneration services, including highways, planning, were TUPID to Balfour Beatty, now NG. And this is a structure in NG. And as you can see, in the middle is highways, because I sit in the highways team. And we have a head of highways called Martin Lear. And then he's in, he manages traffic, transport, drainage, parking, highway asset management, and the highway maintenance operational teams. And I sit in the highway asset management team. And we've got a few teams, as you can see, sort of including traffic signals, highway structures, highways maintenance, that includes highways inspectors. And then there's me, the public rights of way mapping officer, and I'm responsible for all DMMOs, PPOs, consultation on planning applications, project briefs, England Coastal Path, property searches, temporary traffic regulation orders, maintenance of all the finger posts and bridges, and that's all managed by me. And I've got two part-time staff who survey all the paths on a 19-month cycle, and they also look at the way clearance checks and reinstatement checks. All the public rights of way in North East Lincolnshire are inspected on a 19-month rotational cycle, and they've each got a tablet and can raise issues from the tablet. Going back to the transport team, they currently produce all the sort of promotional material, the walks leaflets that are available on our website. And then as Chris sort of referred to it, our definitive maps already in the archives, and the offices are just used for printing or looking through the old parish survey notes. And that's our structure.
Again, I'll ask a question myself, Matthew. Looking at that chart, it seems as if the maintenance roles are rather separated from the one-headed PROW. Could you explain how that works? Who gives instructions to who for maintenance?
Yeah. If I need a post sort of reinstalling, I raise a works order from the system that my inspectors use out on site, but I've got a desktop system, and that works order is pinged straight to the highways maintenance team, who check to see if they've got any stock available. I'm responsible for the stocking as well, and they go out and replace it if, depending on how busy they are, because the sort of highway stuff, the sort of stuff on the roads is sort of greater importance, unfortunately, than my public rights of way. And then they go out and repair or install.
So they act in effect as a sort of contractor to you. And just as if you ordered some building work done on your house, the builder might not come straight away.
Yeah. Exactly like that. Yeah.
Right. Can I move? Well, thanks for that, Matthew. But can I move on to any questions that anyone else has? Can you? I'm relying on Robert here to tell me. No, nobody got any questions? Okay then. Well, let's move up then to.
Sid has. Mr. Mill.
I was just going to ask Matthew, are you and your cohorts working from home, or have you got a central office?
Mainly from home. My two inspectors are sort of home based. It doesn't look like we're going to ever get back into the office, to be honest. There's sort of less and less desks, and to be honest, it can do what it can do from home that I would do in the office.
Right, thank you.
Okay.
Right, just give a few moments, see if anyone else has anything. If not, I will thank both those officers for giving those reports, and perhaps we could say to Matthew as well, I'm not sure that Matthew's, if anybody thinks they would like a copy of that chart, do say so, but I'm not sure that I feel the need. Much smaller, simpler structure there. I'll move on to item 7 then, roundup of issues encountered by authorities in delivering access work during pandemic protocols. And again, we're going to have one from each of the authorities, and who's going to be first? Since Matthew's just given one, we'll go over to you then, Chris.
Yeah, well, I think actually it was me that put this on the agenda.
Right.
Anyway, and to be fair, these are the sort of things that affect every local authority, not just Lincolnshire. So it would be the same for Matthew as it is for us. In general terms, I would suspect. So really, yes, I just wanted to outline the position we've been in, because obviously it's been quite a long time since the Local Access Forum met. And obviously the pandemic has been taking hold across the world, and Lincolnshire's obviously not been spared that. And if you remember back right to the outset, the one thing that Boris allowed us all to go and do was to go and walk. And we saw a tremendous take up of the activity and the usage of rights of way in those initial few months of the lockdowns. And ourselves and most authorities that I've spoken to over the last 2 years have had similar experiences, in that it was local routes. So by that I don't mean the routes, you know, across lots and lots of arable fields, but it's the routes closest to urban centres, villages and so on, and people going out and exploring their local neighbourhoods, which was absolutely great as far as, you know, the service is concerned, that people were actively out there and using the network, which is exactly what we promote and want people to do. Of course, the people who own the land over which the rights of way ran weren't quite as acceptive of the sudden surge in interest in the routes that passed through their gardens, past their front doors, past their back doors, past their windows, through their farmyards, through the cattle, and so on. And we became very, very busy with a lot of very, and understandably at the time, frightened individuals, because no one knew how the virus was being transmitted, whether or not you could catch it from surface contact with wood, so people crossing stiles and opening gates and so on. And people were really worried about their own personal welfare where a public right of way passed through their property. So we spent a lot of time you know, dealing with those scenarios. A lot of people illegally obstructing public rights of way, through, you know, understandably why, but not legal all the same, and us having to advise them that they had to remove those barriers. What we did as a profession, so, you know, all authorities did this. We spoke to DEFRA and got some appropriate wording about allowing people to use alternative routes, you know, promoting alternative routes to the legal definitive line, if that meant that you could pass further away from a house, or avoid going through a farmyard or through a field with cattle or lambs or whatever. On that side of things, you know, in the wider countryside context, there were clear, when we were allowed to travel a bit more, areas with particular scenic qualities, we're seeing a lot of the honeypot issues. Maybe not so much in Lincolnshire, but you think about some of the places in the Peak or the Lake District or North Yorks Moors and the other national parks and AOMBs, and we were having issues with fires, you know, barbecues being left, litter, wild camping and people leaving, you know, the tents behind and all that kind of thing. So again, there was a pressure on services across the country in that regard. I don't think Lincolnshire, and I'm sure Matt will correct me if I'm wrong, but I suspect North East Lincolnshire didn't suffer so much from those sorts of issues, other than in localised situations. So, for example, we had a lot of issues regarding car parking in some of the smaller wolds villages that we had to deal with, places like Walesby or Tealby, or but even outside of the AMBs, if you had something like particularly river-based walks, were very popular with parents with children who have been shut in, not been able to go very far for a few months, and then suddenly they were allowed out. Well, let's go for a picnic, let's go to the local weir or stepping stones. So we had a lot of honeypot issues like that, and that was creating issues with car parking. We had more than one or two incidences where farmers were phoning up demanding that we did something about ramblers and walker and riders' cars blocking their agricultural machinery. So you know, that was another strand of work that we had to encounter. On the flip side, yes, those have been the pressures on the services and how busy we've been being kept over the last 18 to 20 months. But there have been obviously some benefits. The understanding of the value of the network is much more widely recognised. Clearly, as rights of way professionals, we've been espousing this for way over 20 years, and certainly since the times of the initial rights of way improvement plans, about the benefits to health and well-being, sustainable transport and active travel, as is now known, the social impact of being able to go for a walk with other people, and also the tourism angle to it and the economy, and you know, that is now much better understood, perhaps, or respected at from a council point of view, from a management level, and dare I say it, since I have a councillor in the room, in Councillor Cleaver, at a political level too, and not least in local government, but also central government, where maybe not directly attributed to public rights of way per se, but there have been finances available for the walking and cycling agenda. I don't know if anyone picked up on the Chancellor's announcements in the last budget about there being billion. I think it was billion, not million, being put aside. Billion sounds a lot. Maybe it's million. A lot for cycling. But that also is meant to include walking infrastructure. And whilst that might be directed more at the active travel agendas and more sort of utilitarian cycling and walking and things close to urban centres, it will no doubt have an impact on routes that demonstrate access to the countryside, for that access to nature, the health and well-being agendas as well. So there are, if you are lucky enough to be in an authority that's able to gain some of these finances, and not all will, there are potential benefits to that realigned thinking. So I don't know if Matt wants to add anything further from a North East Lincolnshire perspective. The one thing I will just sort of finish on, aside from rights of way, but access to nature and the environment generally, is obviously having a coastline was a particular challenge, because we also, in my offices, also manage coastal access along the strip, particularly between Mablethorpe and Skegness. Very, very popular as soon as lockdowns ended. You may recall, the queues for toilets and things like that being on the local news and the like. And whilst we might not have suffered like Brighton, things got very busy, and obviously that meant we had some very tense and upset residents of those locations who were feeling that they were being invaded in some cases, and that's the perception they had. So again, that took officers some time to resolve some of those issues, which all sort of impacts on the day job. So yes, as I say, unless Matthew has anything extra to add. Matt?
Yeah, I would say I'd agree that there's the car parking issues. We had issues at Irby, close to the two places you mentioned, where the vehicles are sort of blocking the road. And then there's been the increase of unauthorised trespassers. Quite a few landowners have contacted me about the signage, sort of displaying the location of public rights of way on their land, to explain to users where the rights of way are. So yeah, I agree with everything else.
Okay, does anybody have any questions then to ask the two officers about this subject? I'm looking. Pardon? Peter, can you speak?
Yeah, it's a signage related question for Chris. We had two cases in South Kesteven of sheep worrying, both of which led to dead ewes. And I've been approached by two different landowners, basically asking why warnings about dogs on public rights of way, is there any signage available? I'm not aware of any, and although a number of landowners around me have put up their own notices, they tend not to be very durable. I have to say, both people were prosecuted successfully for allowing their dogs to injure the ewes. So it's pretty serious. It was definitely a case of people who are not used to walking in the countryside, but they now live in the countryside. So is there any signage available that we would encourage putting out where we have public rights of way signage posts in place?
Thank you, Peter. We don't actually have any bespoke signage to that effect. However, we're always happy to engage with local livestock owners to aid where we can, because we appreciate that these are working landscapes, and whilst there may be a legal right of access, there are some responsibilities that come with that access. And I think Matt alluded to it, and you just have done there, that some of the let's call them a new breed of user, isn't perhaps quite as au fait with the responsibilities that go with that access. So we did have a lot of reports of dogs being loose. And as Matt says, a lot of trespass issues, which of course come past our desk, but we're a little less power to actually deal with trespass, because it's a civil issue between the owner and the member of the public. We will always happily chat with livestock owners and perhaps discuss appropriate wordings. We've done this from well before the pandemic. We've got paths that lead through areas which are often used for lambing, and we allow temporary diversions, informal diversions. We don't allow the legal route to be closed, but we don't mind if the occupier promotes look, I'd rather you use this route kind of approach, but you can't stop people using the legal line. So we're open to those kind of discussions, but yeah, sadly we don't actually have any particular signage.
One further question: if there is a standard sign, Chris, I've got a parish council meeting tonight. We're minded to actually pay for the signs ourselves, but I'm not aware of a standard keep your dogs under control sign.
Well, can I chip in here? Over the years, I have certainly from time to time seen signs which are professionally made, and I couldn't say who put them up now, but quite likely by the NFU or the Country Landowners Association or some other body like that. And it seemed to me that there ought to be some close cooperation between the authorities and bodies like that. And they could be shared work. It might be that the NFU, say, could provide a sign that the footpath officers or maintenance people could routinely add to the signposts. But I think a degree of liaison would be very sensible. It's particularly important that the wording is correct, and that so somebody who knows what they're talking about designs the sign, and they can provide it, as you say, to parish councils or to the footpath officers when they're going about their regular maintenance work. Can I ask the officers to consider that and look into it?
Chairman, it's actually an ongoing strand of work within the profession, not necessarily through Lincolnshire, but through our professional membership organisations with the NFU and the CLA and with DEFRA and Natural England about those sorts of that kind of approach. The CLA and the NFU, I'm fairly certain both, definitely the NFU, have signage for, but obviously they're membership organisations, so they would only release it to their members. But there are opportunities there. They do have some signage. In terms of LCC's signage, we do have advisory signage that says, this is farmland, please keep your dog on a lead. But that's as far as it goes. And they're the small yellow sort of 3-inch square plaques that you'll see dotted around, usually on a way marker post. Now we do have those, but usually what we find is that the landowner is wanting something more robust and a bit bigger to really drive home the notice that please can you keep your dog on a lead. Obviously it can only be a request because there is no law that insists that they are as yet, and that's something that the NFU and the CLA are working on with DEFRA and Natural England.
Does anyone else have any questions for either of the two officers?
Yes, please, Chairman.
Go ahead.
Is there any hope of the Parish Paths Partnership being brought into use again? Our parish council has decided they can't justify increasing the precept to pay for the paths maintenance, and of course we're now receiving complaints not from locals but from people coming to try and walk our paths. So obviously they had asked if I would inquire if there was any hope of that being brought back into use, because it was really very, very good service. Thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Harrison. Sadly not at present. It was a financially directed decision or requirement that the former Parish Paths Partnership ceased. If you recall the era of austerity from 2011, when we had to find huge savings across the board, that was one area which regrettably was dispensed with. It was a great shame because it did great work. I am always mindful of opportunities to potentially set that back up again, and it's under constant review in terms of my own work from a rights of way strategy point of view. But as yet, the finances would indicate that we're unable to do that. Quite honestly, at the moment, we are struggling a little bit just to cover our own duties, let alone enter into voluntary arrangements.
Do you want to say anything in reply, Sandra? Well, Sandra, wasn't it?
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. At least it's nice to know that it's something, as it was done in the past, that it is supported. Let's hope there is some time and opportunity to bring it back.
Yep. Are there any more questions?
Yes, my hand is raised.
Yep.
This is mainly for Chris. As a representative of the Ramblers, can you refrain from calling all walkers Ramblers? Because you mentioned earlier that Ramblers are causing problems, and it's not necessarily correct in that way. We have had newspaper items blaming Ramblers for a variety of things, and people associate it with the association rather than just walkers who walk.
Thank you. Yes, so noted, and my apologies. However, in that occasion, it was the Ramblers.
I have some sympathy with Chris. It's difficult to pronounce Ramblers with a capital R differently from Ramblers with a small r.
Right.
But Chris will note that. Any more questions? Can you see any, Robert? No. Okay. I shall move on then. Oh, well, yes. Matthews, you've had an opportunity to speak, haven't you? Yeah. Item 8, legislative change programme. I think we're going to have, again, Chris, you're going to speak to this, are you? Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so the legislative change programme. So those who can recall back as far as our last meeting, I mentioned the Deregulation Act, which was passed in 2016, of which many of the elements that affect rights of way management and operation are not yet in force and are waiting secondary legislation to be passed through both the Lords and the Commons before we're able to use that. Now, that Act will have a massive impact on how we deliver our services, particularly with regards to the management of the definitive map and statement. It has less of an impact on maintenance and enforcement issues, other than it will allow us to authorise gates on restricted byways, and which is something we can't do at present, providing it's for the usual circumstances of being on agricultural land and for the control of animals. But the impacts on the definitive map side of work are going to be quite extensive. The main one that it will bring in, and for those of you who have been in the rights of way world for long enough will remember this, is the idea of a cut-off date for the definitive map for applications for routes that were in existence before 1949. And so where the evidence is usually of the documentary variety as opposed to the more recent user type. That is still due to close on the 1st of January 2026 if the Countryside and Rights of Way Act legislation is enacted in its current form. However, there is an opportunity for an extension to be granted by the Secretary of State, and it does look like the signs are that that will happen. There will be an extension, but it won't be for the full 5 years allowable. It's probably only going to be for a period of time in which Brexit and latterly the pandemic has delayed implementation. So we might get 2.5 years perhaps leeway, but there is no guarantees on that, and there are still conversations being had amongst the various groups involved in the formulation of that legislation as to what will happen. So we are still taking 2026 as being the date. Now, obviously, what that means is that a lot of users and user groups and here I will use the word ramblers, and also the British Horse Society and others, have been on a voluntary capacity researching whether or not paths have been missed off the definitive map back when it was originally drawn up. The concept of what is often known as lost ways. And in this authority, in Lincolnshire, we've had quite a lot of dialogue with the British Horse Society over the last couple of years. And we've had quite a high number, I can't remember the exact figure, quite a high number of cases submitted to us as applications over the last couple of years to make sure that they're on the register before the cut-off date, which will be one of the things that will save them. We might not have been able to process them, but as long as they've been received by us and have been authenticated as an appropriate application, then that will save it from extinguishment, you know, the swinging extinguishment that you'll get on the 1st of January 2026. Latterly, we have been contacted by ramblers from Nottinghamshire. And again, I am using the word ramblers in its correct context here, where they've been looking at Nottingham's enclosure awards and other historic documents, Tithe Awards and the Finance Act and so on, and found quite a few cross-boundary routes that they're looking at for Lincolnshire, but also then moving in to the Lincolnshire area as well, and looking at some paths. I understand mainly on the western side of the authorities area at the minute, but they're now also speaking with the British Horse Society, making sure there's no duplication of effort in looking at certain routes that may have already been applied for and so on. So what we're seeing is a building of momentum of cases which will sit with the authority to, at some point in time, take a view on as to whether or not that evidence is sufficient to make an order and then process them accordingly. You will recall that we already have a backlog of such work dating back to the original Wildlife and Countryside Act in 1981, and that currently stands, I think, at 150. I'm going to say 4, I think, but it might have slightly changed since I last looked. 154 cases that the team that I mentioned earlier in outlining who we are and what we do, the team that Karen Bart looks after with her sort of 3 definitive map officers. So clearly there's going to be a lot of work ahead there. One of the things I'm looking at is our resource levels, our ability to deal with those influxes, not just from a processing point of view, but just from the sheer administrative weight of processing the application into the system. Even if we don't actually do a lot of work on it, there's still quite a lot that has to be done to get it on the registers. So looking at that resource level. So that's one major element of the Deregulation Act. The second element is the right to apply, which is regarding diversions and extinguishments, where at the moment it is purely a power of the authority to process such applications, and we basically invite them, but we have a power to refuse. You know, we don't have to engage. We can just say no outright without giving it any great consideration. The right to apply will change that, in that there will, as I say, as the name suggests, there will be a right to apply for an extinguishment or a diversion, and we will have to assess it within a 6-month period and report, you know, create a report as to what we intend to do with that application. Now, just because there's a right to apply doesn't mean to say there's a right to actually engage the full process and actually have a path diverted or extinguished, but we have to give good reason why we wouldn't do it. So, for example, if someone's looking at diverting, you know, a very nice path to somewhere that isn't very nice, we would probably decline to do it. You know, and the usual tests of the legislation will still have to be applied as to whether or not it's a viable proposal, but we won't just be able to say no right at the outset. We'll have to do a proper formal report, which again is going to be time consuming and resource heavy. The other strand to that, which whilst it isn't in the Deregulation Act, we understand that it's almost certainly going to be in the secondary regulations towards it, is that there will be a presumption that anything that affects security or privacy for householders or businesses will be processed, and that there will also be a presumption of success. Now, how that will all work, we still don't know, because we've not had sight of the regulations. Because public path orders are quite subjective in terms of their quality. One man's meat's another man's poison, and so on. We're not quite sure how that will balance out if there's a supposed presumption of success. Does that mean that an alternative route, which isn't as nice as the original route, is allowable? Or is there a degree of allowable? It's not as good, but it's not substantially not as good. That kind of thinking, which again is going to cause, no doubt, the lawyers to have lots of fun and earn lots of money in court when these things are argued about. But again, it's going to be a challenge for the authority to keep on top of that. We already have a list of 42 potential applicants based on privacy and security grounds who have heard about it, have been advised by lawyers about it, and have already approached us. And at present, we're keeping them at arm's length, and we're saying, well, you'll have to wait until we know more about how it will work. But there could be a flood of applications as soon as it's published. And currently, I only have one officer dealing with all that type of work at present, and she's already got quite a lot on without that additional strain. So that's going to be something of a challenge for the authority. Now, those are the two main strands. There are other little bits and pieces about how we process things. So, for example, will no longer be a stipulation to advertise in the press. We can dispense with doing that. We as an authority can determine irrelevant objections to definitive map modification orders. And possibly PPO, public path orders as well, although because they're subjective, it's hard to say what's relevant, what isn't sometimes. But certainly with definitive map orders, that will mean that we're not going to have to send things to the planning inspectorate all the time for public inquiries. If something is only being held up because there's a clear, what we call an irrelevant objection, which is usually something which isn't challenging the evidence, it's usually just somebody's opinion about the path that they don't like it, not challenging the evidential process, which is what really matters. We can dispense with that ourselves without having submitting that to the planning inspectorate, and that will be challengeable in the magistrate's court rather than anywhere else, putting the onus back on those wishing to make those objections. So there are other things more minor in play. I'm wondering, Chairman, at some point, would it be worthwhile a more formal report, when I've got the time to write one? I didn't have one for this meeting particularly, outlining some of the individual elements without going into too much detail, but at least listing so that people can ask questions about how that might operate.
I think it would, but it should be framed for a wider consumption than this organisation. I'm sure that all of the bodies interested in rights of way, from parish councils, ramblers, British Horse Society, etc., are the people who are would find it most useful. Although, of course, some of those will be getting their own advice through their own organisations. But to know how you interpret it would be, I think, useful for the wider public.
Certainly, yes, I can organise that, Chairman, perhaps for the next meeting.
Are there, I'm going to see if anyone's got any questions. I might say one or two things myself.
Yes, please, Chris, if I could just raise something. It's really to raise awareness. In our area, we've got lots of what we call green lanes, which have never actually been put on maps because they've seemed perfectly safe, because the landowners need to access their land. So we've all of us ridden those for donkey's years, never had any problems. But what's happening is that the larger landowners are increasing size all the time, and eventually they will own all the land down some of the green lanes, so that they won't automatically, I fear, be open to general use again. And it is something that we need to have an awareness of, and perhaps make people aware of the fact that they really maybe ought to start registering them, or the process to do so, to protect them. It's happening in so much of Lincolnshire at the moment in the rural areas.
I think that's a very good point, and I'll use an opportunity to say something I was going to. I know that I'm aware of the Ramblers Association gearing up to make definitive map modification applications, but also I understand that the British Horse Society is getting quite organised at a national and local level, and they will be beginning to do these things. So it might be for the kind of green lanes you're talking about, to see what the BHS is up to on these things. I'll make a comment as well on what Chris was saying about the Deregulation Act, or the right to apply for diversions. It's more a right to appeal against a refusal, of course, because anybody can apply now informally. But I hope that the same degree of latitude, I might call it, that local authorities have to put things on the shelf for 30 years will apply to those applications as it does to the applications made for DMMOs by the users. But that's a comment. You don't need to reply, Chris.
Well, I could, as much as I think you're probably right that that's possibly what will happen, is that there will be so many and we won't have the resource to deal with them all at once, and we will have to form some form of prioritisation of that as we do the definitive map ones. And any such policy will also, of course, come before the local access forum for discussion before it's published.
Are there any more questions to ask Chris or indeed Matt? No? Okay. Well, I move on to item 9 and the English coastal path. And we're back to the same people to make their reports.
It tends to be that way, Chairman, I'm afraid.
This meeting, isn't it?
It's a good job we don't have these too often, and you can get a rest from my voice. Okay, so this is one where actually there is a prepared report, so hopefully you've all had a copy. I know Rob circulated it round, regarding the England Coast Path, and in particular the impact it has on Lincolnshire. So obviously, if you're looking at the report, on the first page there, I've provided a short national overview, of which there is an appendix E, shows you it's slightly blurred, I'm afraid, in reproduction, but if you're able to see it electronically, you can probably see it better than I can. But showing you which areas are already open and which areas are still in the proposal stage and so on. But you can see the extent of the work, 67 stretches being worked on by Natural England across the project piece. Now, originally, we were working to an accelerated programme for the opening of the England Coast Path, as announced by the then Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg. As local authorities, we didn't know who was going to say it. I'm not sure Natural England were either. But the idea was that the route was open by 2021 or the end of 2021. Now, that's going to be missed, not least because obviously issues regarding the pandemic has significantly impacted. But there was also another impact with the European Court judgment. It wasn't specifically about the Coast Path, it was about wind turbines. And it's known as the Sweetman judgment, or people over wind, which basically changed the point in time at which a habitats regulation assessment has to be undertaken for a project of this sort of significance. And unfortunately, there were a number of stretches where reports had been published, hadn't been approved by the Secretary of State, but had done the habitats regulation in the old format, which was perfectly acceptable at the time, but wouldn't make it able to be approved by the Secretary of State. In a Lincolnshire context, the Sutton Bridge to Skegness section was one such of the 16, one of the 16. So although the route had been selected, the route had been published, gone through the report stage, and had received 2 objections, very minor objections, nothing that couldn't have been dealt with and negotiated, and as was the case. And we had a site visit with the planning inspector quite a long time ago. It was February 2 years ago, I think now. And we were awaiting the formal approval of the formal report and the final approval. However, this European judgment put the kibosh on that a little bit, and we've had to wait until there was opportunity for that habitats regulation inspection to be redone in a different way. But of course, there was a lot of demand for those, because all of a sudden every single stretch needed to have one before the report could be published. So the specialists within Natural England who were engaged to do that work suddenly had a huge influx of things they needed to do. So again, some things have had to wait. Thankfully, we're pretty much beyond that stage. The habitat regulation assessment for that stretch was done very recently, I think. I think it was done late August. And so now we're just waiting for the approval element of it. I've skipped ahead a little bit, as you can see from the report in my overview. But just to come back to the actual concept of the coast path, it's around England Path. Wales has its own path already, and it will link up existing stretches of highway or public right-of-way that would form a coastal route, linking it up with new access rights to create a continuous path all the way around the country, linking in with the Welsh one as well. So hopefully you then get a full one. Obviously Scotland has different access regimes, so it can't be linked into north of the border. And in principle, it is a path. It is not a public right of way. It is something different. It's actually an extension of the right to roam land, but now including not just mountain, moorland, downland and heath, but also coastal margin. So what you have is a report on the area of land considered to be coastal margin for open public access, but within that that area, a path will be aligned. As I say, sometimes that'll be an existing public right of way, sometimes it will be a newly created path. In doing so, Natural England have run the project on a 5-stage basis. So prepare, develop, propose, determine and open. And if you look at the report, the 4 sections that affect Lincolnshire are in various stages. Now, the first section from Hunstanton to Sutton Bridge only has a very, very, very short section in Lincolnshire between the Norfolk border and Sutton Bridge over the River Nene, which is already on public right of way. It's already a public bridleway, so there's not a lot we're going to have to get to deal with with that very short stretch. That's currently in the determine phase. We're awaiting approval from the Secretary of State before the Norfolk Partnership will take control of that and start establishing it on the ground. The next section up from Sutton Bridge to Skegness, as I've already discussed about the habitats regulations issue and the people over wind judgment, we are awaiting formal confirmation of the route. There's some work to be done still because of the new proposal for the alternative energy facility at Boston, new energy from waste facility, which will impact the accessibility of the River Witham as it enters into Boston, as the route into and out of Boston on either side. So there's still a bit of work to do there, but we're hopeful that that won't take too long and we'll receive approval shortly and we can start getting on with the establishment works jointly between ourselves and Natural England. The major piece of infrastructure on that section will be a bridge at Gibraltar Point, where currently there's an internal drainage board facility for crossing the river steeping, I think it is, but it needs a little bit of work doing to it to bring it up to publicly acceptable usability. But at least there's a piece of infrastructure there and we're not having to build a brand new bridge from scratch, which would be extremely time consuming and expensive. But that's the major piece of infrastructure. Obviously, there'll be a lot of gates to be installed where currently there are stiles on some of the existing public rights of way along the sea bank, which is quite extensively right of way. I think the major section that isn't is between Friskney and Gibraltar Point, around the edge of the wash, where that will be creating a brand new access right where there isn't one currently. For the rest of the route, there's already public rights of way running on the line that would be selected as the coast path. So from Skegness up to Mablethorpe, the short 26-kilometre stretch, that's already open. Some of you will recall the work that we did on that before, through the establishment work, including the extension of the promenade at Chapel St Leonard's, which now allows mobility scooter users and wheelchair users and mothers with pushchairs and so on, better access from the coastal observatory at Chapel Point all the way through to Ingermells and then on to Skegness, which has been really, really popular. We've had so many good reports about people thanking us for the ability to be able to do that now, for that investment that we'd put in to just extend the promenade for a relatively short distance, but it did just link up the sea defence structure and promenade in a more coherent way. The difficulty we have with this stretch, and which is probably going to be the ongoing difficulty for the whole length between the Humber and Sutton Bridge eventually, is windblown sand obstructing the promenade, which then obviously impacts on those people in mobility vehicles and push chairs and wheelchairs, and the cyclists for where they're able to cycle along the route. And we are beset by complaints every year about the inaccessibility due to sand going across it. I point out I'm good, but I'm not so brilliant as to hold back sand. I'm not King Canute. And we can only do what we can. And obviously resources are not unlimited for going out and clearing sand from the promenade, which is naturally occurring, but also exacerbated by the flood defence project, where they pump sand up onto the beach from the inshore waters to aid with flood defence. And of course, the balance has to be struck between protecting lives and property and the ability to access along the promenade. And whilst I'm not saying either is more important than the other, far be it from me to say, but both need to be recognised. But sometimes finding the balance between the two might mean that the access element has to work a bit harder, perhaps, to be established. So that's going to be an ongoing issue between ourselves, East Lindsey, and the Environment Agency as more and more of the path becomes open in Lincolnshire. And then the final stretch between Mablethorpe and the Humber Bridge, which obviously takes in Matt's area of North East Lincolnshire Council, and also our colleagues at North Lincolnshire, where it runs along the banks of the Humber. That too is in the determine phase. Happily, there was only one objection, which hasn't been determined yet. I don't think the site visit is due until the end of this month. However, there is only one, and it's on a relatively minor point regarding a gate. So naturally, we're very hopeful that this can be resolved quite quickly. The biggest issues that we've noticed, certainly on the Lincolnshire side, and I'll let Matt come in if there's anything from North East Lincolnshire's perspective, but from the Lincolnshire side of the board, the biggest issue was around Donna Nook, with the two issues combined of the seal breeding season, which we're obviously just starting through now in November, which makes the area very popular, very busy, but also quite sensitive from an environmental impact point of view, but also the presence of the MOD in the bombing range, which, the MOD have issues with the proximity of the path to their facility in some cases. So a lot of work had to be done to negotiate around that with the Defence Infrastructure Organisation, who represent the MOD. And what there will be is a seasonal alternative. So during the seal breeding season, the path will be formally realigned and formally realigned to a new route, and the normal route closed for the duration of the breeding season, just to help protect the seals and to stop what the Wildlife Trust are finding is that more and more people are visiting the site, the more and more the seals are beginning to migrate into different areas where it's harder to manage what happens with the seals and so on. So they've been the Wildlife Trust have been quite cautious about the coast path, both there and at Gibraltar Point, albeit for different reasons at Gibraltar Point with the bird life.
Can I ask you to wind up soon?
Certainly, Chris. I'm near the end of the report anyway. In fact, the end of the report is more to do with how we might manage it going forward. And I think probably the easiest thing to do is leave you to read that and ask me questions at a later date if necessary. But the main point is that the expectation is that the path is managed in partnership with the three highway authorities being the main partners, ourselves, North Links and North East Links with Matt, and the other partners such as the district councils, the Wildlife Trust, the MOD, National Trust and so on, will form part of a wider partnership about how the path is managed on the principle of, I'll just leave you with this, the 4 E's principles of management, because this will be a national trail, part of the national trail set, of which the quality standards are based around experience, enhancement, engagement and economy. So rather than it being managed just like the way that the public rights of way network is, something's wrong, we go away and maintain it, we are expected as authorities to adhere to those 4 strands of the 4 E's and work towards that, which is why we're looking at engaging a bespoke officer to help do that, because we can't just add all that complexity to the existing rights of way officers, because they have enough to do with the rest of the network. And I think that'll probably suffice.
Right, I'll just ask if Matt has anything he wants to add for North East Lincolnshire.
No, nothing to add really. Me and Chris have got a meeting next week with Natural England to look at the next step of the coastal path. That's about it.
Okay. I see we have You know, we still have several reports, verbal reports to get through. So can we just, we're going to have to get through these all. So if we can get to the next one, Chris, which is Lincolnshire County Council's local transport plan.
Sure, these ones should be mercifully
Oh,
quick by comparison, Chairman, because they're just basically me highlighting that they are there.
Sorry, can I just stop you? I forgot to ask if anybody wanted to ask Chris on this last one, the coastal access plan. Does anybody want to ask any questions on that? Nope. Okay then. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it was just to highlight that the local transport plan 5 is now open for consultation, and Rob has circulated the link for members of the forum to have a look at that, and you can respond in your own right or collectively as a forum. That's between yourselves as a forum, really. The only thing I will say about the transport plan is that this time round, transport plan 5, the walking agenda, the cycling agenda, my team has been far more engaged by the transport strategy people. And we've had a lot more conversations about local transport plan, not just being about utilitarian usage, but also that access to the countryside in terms of what strategies come forward in terms of active travel and tourism and economy and so on. So I think we're probably a little bit better represented in this local transport plan variant than we have been previously, which is pleasing to see. But do feel free to check out the link and come to your own conclusions.
Right. Any questions on that for the moment? I will remark that the rights of way improvement plan, which is the next item, the local transport plan, I believe supposed to be integrated. Isn't that correct, Chris?
Yes, although they can be separate. Usually, and Lincolnshire was no exception here, and I say usually, there was an opportunity for a completely bespoke and separate rights of way improvement plan, which is how we operated. Some authorities included their ROIP as part of their LTP, but we kept the two because we're quite a large authority. We felt there was enough to be said about rights of way in its own right, rather than just being integrated. But they are always reflective of each other. That's the key.
Right. Does Matt want to say anything? Matt?
No, all good.
Questions then on the local transport plan? Okay. I shall move on then. You can carry on, Chris, talk about the Rights of Way Improvement Plan.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so Rights of Way Improvement Plan 2. For those who are not aware, there was a stipulation in the Countryside and Rights of Way Act in 2000 that authorities had to produce a Rights of Way Improvement Plan, which I'm probably going to just shorten to ROIP from now on because it's quicker to say. And we, as a local highway authority, did as was required, and we published our first Rights of Way Improvement Plan in 2007 with a 5-year coverage to it to 2012. That was extended, as we were allowed to do, for another 5 years to 2017. Since 2017, we have had a duty to prepare and publish a new Rights of Way Improvement Plan. Resources being what resources have been, that hasn't taken place yet. And is a piece of work that is now overdue. However, it is the intention of the authority to now start to formally put that together properly. In some ways, the delay to that, it hasn't affected us greatly because Rights of Way Improvement Plan is still a good document. It was a good piece of work at the time, and I've probably mentioned this before, and some people will be sick of me saying it, but it was award-winning in terms of its engagement. It was considered to be the best engagement piece of all the ROIPs in the country. So we felt we'd done a decent job on it. So it's not like it's a poor piece of work that needed a lot of things doing to it, but we do have this need to publish ROIP 2. One of the benefits, as I say, of the delay to it is that we can now reflect on the past 18 months where circumstances have changed a little about how we might perceive the Rights of Way network and what our strategies might be in terms of delivering improvements where we can and the sort of themes we would like to push forward on. So it does give us that opportunity to reflect on that last 18-month period where things have changed a little bit, as I mentioned earlier in the piece about the pandemic. But again, suffice to say that work will be coming forward in the near future, and the Local Access Forum is a crucial part of the work in the initial stages of it to help guide and form some of the theme work as it did the first time round. on this second one. Now, there may be not so much to say because we've already got a row. We already have an idea of what we might want it to look like. But as with anything, things can be improved, things can be bettered, and we can, as I say, reflect on the last 18 to 20 months of access networking. Thank you, Chairman.
Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
No, mine was all sort of stamped by committee earlier in the year, ROIP 2, so it's all good.
Yeah. I'm going to say a little bit about this, and I'm going to be a little bit critical, Chris, because the original brief of the local access forums was to have a significant role in the preparation of rights of way improvement plans. Now, in practice, as I think you know, the County Council only allowed the LAF to have an input in that it appointed one representative on a consultative body. So it's highly diluted and rather indirect in its input. And the original rights of way plan was, as one of your officers described it to me, framed largely around the knowledge that the government was funding many things at that time by pots of money which had to be applied for. And so they put as many things into the rights of way improvement plan that they could think of that might make it eligible to apply for a pot of money. And I think that made it a hugely broad, what's the word? It cast its brief very broadly without focusing on anything in particular. And I remember one draft, I think of one that never actually came out for the second one, in which some of the targets in the rights of way improvement plan were not to allow backlogs of work to increase by more than a certain amount. So they were in fact rights of way disimprovement plans. And I think that probably I'm not alone here in thinking that the rights of way improvement plan should have more input from the user organisations and be less of a kind of, this is what we're going to do, what do you think at the last moment sort of consultation.
Agreed. On par of that.
All right. Anybody wish to say anything, ask any questions, please do. Yeah. I can't read. Angie, it's your.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask briefly, on the rights of way improvement plans, there always seem to be quite a lot of walking and cycling routes. And again, I'm going to ask, is there going to be anything for horse riders and carriage drivers? Because we have very, very little off-road access in Lincolnshire. And on multi-user trails, that seems to be the buzzword now through Sustrans and people like that. Horse riders and carriage drivers seem to be left out in the cold, as it were.
I would totally agree with that and support it. That's Sandra Harrison.
I couldn't see who that was, but I'm assuming it was Sandra.
Sandra, it was Sandra, yes.
Thought it might be. Thank you, Angie. Thank you, Sandra. Yes, absolutely. Well, the rights of way improvement plan is reflective of all rights of way. It isn't based on necessarily aligning to one type or another, status or another. We do appreciate that Lincolnshire isn't brilliantly served with bridleway networks. There are some areas which have better networks than others. Obviously, over a large county, that's not consistent. What we can do about that is actually relatively limited, because we have to remember that the rights of way network is predominantly an historic network. It's not something we're creating. It's something we're managing from a situation that's been inherited over hundreds and hundreds of years. Where we can, we will take opportunity to promote the highest levels of access achievable. So if we feel that there's an opportunity to create links in the bridleway network, that is what we will aim to do.
Can I just say, you say about bridleways. Bridleways are open to horse riders, unfortunately not to us carriage drivers. The only restricted byways and boats are open to carriage drivers. And there are very few of them, and most of them that are still there and we are working on it as various equestrian organisations. Most of them, if you've got a restricted byway or a boat, it ends at the parish boundary, where the next parish put it on as a footpath. So they don't go anywhere and you can't turn around on them. So they're basically unusable for us.
Yes, agreed. Completely understood, Angie. You're quite right. That is often the case, not just in Lincolnshire.
But I'm going to stop you there, Chris, because I want to answer something about that myself, which is about the process by which we are consulted and which we conduct our own business as a LAF. I think that waiting until the county council says it's going to produce a plan and then asking it what it's going to do, which is all we seem able to do at the moment, isn't a very good idea. And I'd ask our members to go back, with those of you who belong to other organisations, to go back to them and try and come back and ask to be tabled on our agenda items like this, and we develop our own ideas and say, what can we do? What do we want? And then use this forum to bring those to the authority, because that is the way it's supposed to work. That's the idea behind it. And that's not a criticism of any of you, but I think that will be more helpful to the county council.
Well, I am already the rights of way officer for Lincolnshire for the British Driving Society, so I can speak in that capacity. Yeah,
but we need to have something. If there is some reports, some ideas that we can put on the table and have a discussion, say at our next meeting or at a meeting, so that we're discussing, as it were, our own reports and then deciding what we're going to put forward as a recommendation to the county council, because that is what our role actually is. We are an advisory body. We're supposed to be advising the county council, and I've already said we don't want to have every meeting where we sit here and simply are told what the county council is going to do. And that's not a criticism of Chris, because we haven't been taking an active part in setting our own agenda, and I think we should be doing.
Chairman, if I just might add, you're absolutely right in terms of that engagement and when that engagement happens. Row 2, I haven't put a pen on paper yet. The reason for that is that I want the opportunity for the local access forum, for the associated user groups of rights of way across the board, from the walkers all the way up through to the motoring organisations that were represented in here as well, to have an opportunity to say what it is you would like to see out of the rights of way improvement plan. You might not get everything you want, but at least the conversation has been had at the earliest stage, rather than us presenting you with something and commenting on it.
I'll just carry on this, but I don't want to sidetrack us talking about this now, but it's the sort of thing, we've got a forward agenda programme going up on item 13, the sort of thing that I'm going to suggest we can have on there, talking about the carriage drivers. I think it's realistic to think that we can go creating new carriage roads across virgin countryside, so to speak. But there is an old idea I haven't heard of for a long time, which is quiet roads programme, whereby you take minor roads, and not just for carriage riders. In fact, that's probably something that nobody was thinking about when the idea was first proposed, but to have roads where where the traffic is restricted in speed very severely, a bit like your 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in towns in the countryside, where people could feel they were safe in all kinds of users using them. And another possibility in Lincolnshire for horse riders is have lots of roads that have a footway along the side, as it's technically called in the Highways Act, and I think to have bridleways alongside some of our broad roads that have very wide grass verges. There's lots of things in this country. You can increase the horse. Well, I'm not going on because I don't want to start talking about this now. I want to say let's have something like this on a future agenda, and let's have a time put aside to discuss these sorts of ideas.
Yeah, that would be great from us carriage drivers and riders' perspective. Thank you.
Okay, now, does anybody else want to ask any questions? Peter Hinton, thank you. You're not, I think you must be muted.
I really need to support the chairman's view, because I've just written an integrated traffic plan for a cluster of about 6 villages, and this business about linking walkers, car users, HGV drivers, carriage drivers, horses, you name it. It's not a coordinated setup. You don't go in most places to a linked up network. You have to use the public roads, and it's at the core of how the transport plan is written. We suffered an awful lot from HGV movements along inappropriate roads, putting particularly riders and cyclists at some considerable risk. It has to be at the heart of it, not something you add on at the end.
Thank you. Anybody else want to say
yes,
anything?
please, Chris.
Again?
Could we, as one of the first ones we looked at then, be the one that East Lindsey is currently working on, an idea to come from near Tetney Blowells along the Ludd, along the Louth Canal, back to Riverhead at Louth, which some people are using at the moment anyway. Now, I've made my pleas to them. Please, can you make it available to riders or not? I've had no feedback on that at all. So if that's one of the first ones we could look at and have an input before it's actually on the definitive map, would be absolutely great and much appreciated locally.
Yeah, Sandra, I don't want at the moment to start talking about individual cases, but I think we need to get moving on a process by which individual cases can be brought through the LAF. And I'd be very much appreciated if perhaps after the meeting by email, people could put forward any ideas for the process of what sort of motion or what kind of agenda item we could have. We might form a subcommittee. I'd like people to sort of think about this and come up with their ideas. Otherwise, if anyone else wants to speak on this. I'm relying on the people to tell me if they can see hands up, but they can't. No. Can I move on then to the next item, which is it's item 12, isn't it, Rob? That you finished with the Rights Way Improvement Plan.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is Matt. You're going to talk about North East Lincolnshire's local transport plan. Hello, Matt.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Yep.
Yes, I just wanted to go through a couple of projects that one this year and one that's programmed in sort of next year. Has Rob got the PowerPoint presentation or slides? Yeah, the first one was Public Bridleway 80 in Brigsley. There was a couple of springs alongside it, and these springs ran down to Waith Lane, and the Bridleway and the Waith Lane were often flooded. One of the neighbouring properties thought the best way of sort of getting people along the Bridleway was to add grass clippings to the Bridleway. In fact, it sort of made it worse. On the PowerPoint presentation, there's a couple of photos of Waith Lane that's sort of been flooded and the Bridleway, showing how impassable but it is or was. And earlier this year, there was the design team come up with a sort of creating 8 weirs alongside the public bridleway, and catchment areas for the water, so Waith Lane and the bridleway wouldn't be flooded and impassable. There was a drainage channel created for public footpath 79, and it looks quite good. Shame you can't see the photos, really.
So, sorry, Matt. It seems to be crashing the computer.
That's okay.
Just bear with me.
Okay. Yeah, my photos are probably too large.
Can you see that?
No, it was there and then it sort of disappeared.
Right. Oh, not that. Are we on?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, this is the Bridle Way and how sort of flooded it used to get. And the second picture from the right is Waith Lane, and there's sort of residential properties coming from it. And the other three pictures are of the Bridle Way, and you can see how sort of wet it got. And the second picture from the left, you can see the grass clippings to the side. There's a spring further up the Bridle Way. If we go to the next one, this is the weir system that's been created. There's 8 of these weirs along the Bridle Way, and that's public footpath 79 crossing the drainage channel. And typically we haven't had any rain to sort of to speak of to test the system. If we go to the next one, yeah, and there's more of these weir systems and sort of water retaining areas, and 2 drains have been constructed, and it now goes across Waith Lane into the field for drainage. So it's a local transport plan project to encourage and people to use this during the winter months, and fingers crossed it'll work. Have we got my second slides?
Yep, just bear with me a sec.
Yep, no problem.
Matt, it's Chris. Just out of interest and from a council perspective and council interest, what funding stream did you were you able to tap into for that sort of work? Was it something that was done by your highways maintenance colleagues, or was it directly out of a rights of way funding?
No, it's out of the highway budget for the delivery of the local transport plan. They get a few, I can't remember how many millions. It's not a great big budget, but yeah, sort of tap into that each year just to do a little project. The sort of traffic team and highway asset team, street signals, they all have a sort of a couple of projects each year, and I just sort of put a little project in just to keep sort of public rights of way going, and that was last year's or earlier this year's project. And when Rob gets the second, oh look at that, And this is next year's proposed project of public footpath 10 that runs off of Willesby Road in Grimsby, and it runs sort of between two sort of residential streets and into the back alongside Peaks Parkway. It could be a well-used path, but it sort of gets quite a bit muddy along there, and people chuck all their rubbish across there, and it's difficult to walk in the winter months. And I'm looking at surfacing this path behind Drew Avenue, and then the plan on the right-hand side is between Peaks Lane and Peaksfield allotments. It's just going to be sort of crushed road planings. If we go to the next slide, there should be some nice a couple of photos of the public footpath that's to the rear of Drew Avenue, and it could be quite a good link. If we look at the plan on the left hand side, the faint purple lines are the public footpaths, and just between hospice and the hospital on the top, directly opposite of Peaks Parkway, there's the path we're talking about, and that sort of leads off to Willesby Woods, and then Scaffer, and then New Wolf. It goes south to New Wolf, and then Holton Le Clay. So trying to get people in that locality to sort of spread out and sort of sustainable transport, trying to get them to walk to Willesby Woods. If we go to the next one, last picture, this is the path alongside the allotments and between Peaks Avenue and Peaks Parkway, and you can see how muddy it is. So looking at sort of surfacing that this next year as part of the LTP. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I can see a hand up, Angie.
Yeah, I just wanted a quick question. It looks like in the first pictures the bridleway's been resurfaced.
Yeah.
Were any of the equestrian organisations consulted on the surface that was used on the bridleway?
No, but I've seen it used in equestrian centres.
Okay, because I know there are an awful lot of surfaces that are lethal to horses.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm often in contact with Hazel Armstrong about BHS. Yeah.
It's just a lot of people a lot of local authorities have resurfaced bridleways, and the resurfacing itself has actually meant that from that point onwards they're inaccessible to horses because of the nature of the surface that's used.
Yeah.
So it's always worth bearing in mind that the British Horse Society, I know, have a list of surfaces that will improve the bridleway, and they also have a fund for resurfacing bridleways which you can apply for. So if the councils or the local authorities are struggling and the bridleway needs resurfacing, you can apply to the British Horse Society for additional funding, which will mean that the surface put down is still horse friendly, but it's also an improvement for walkers, and it's an improvement for cyclists as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I can see local government officers' ears pricking up at the words.
I thought they might be.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've made a note of that.
But you know, it just seems awful that so many bridleways have been resurfaced, which then makes them unusable for equestrians.
Yeah.
Chris has wanted to come back, but first of all, Sharon's had a hand up for a while, and ask Sharon, what do you want to say?
Similar vein to what Angie has just said. I was sort of looking at the last screenshot that you did, sorry, photo that you put on there. I presume that's a footpath, so a similar problem with horses and with people as well. If you start tarmacking a road or a path that was previously, you know, mud and leaves and stuff, okay, you sort it for the winter until you get to a point where you've got ice on the path, and it just ruins it for everyone. So all this tarmacking whatever path you can, just to make it easier for a certain group of people, I don't think is the way forward. It needs to be looked at from an all year round user point for as many users as possible. That's my question.
Yeah, I've got a new residential development coming up, and the developers wanted to divert or extinguish the public footpath and then create a public bridleway along this concrete road. And I've said the concrete roads are unsuitable for horse riders because of how slippery it gets during the winter months. And they're going to pull it all up and lay something suitable for horse riders.
Chris, do you still want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm very much on that same response Matt's just given there. There's actually a national piece of work being done with DEFRA at the moment about this very issue, on the back of, obviously over the last few months there's been a lot more focus on the active travel gender, and by that generally people are referring to cycling, although it should reflect on walking and riding as well. But it has meant that there's been an increase in instances of bridleways being surfaced to benefit cyclists, which is all well and good, but it shouldn't be to the detriment of other legal users, and indeed the users they were initially intended for until 1968. So DEFRA are doing a piece of work now and trying to put together some wording and advice to local authorities that where such schemes are proposed, the alternative solution should not be detrimental to an existing class of user. So you shouldn't see, you may see surface changes, but you would hope that the surfaces are more equestrian friendly. Some of the work I do on a national level with one of the organisations I represent has been working quite closely with the BHS and other organisations, the cycling organisations, about the use of recycled rubber crumb and aggregate with a binder, which is much better for equestrians, but absolutely fine for cyclists as well. And that you'll probably find it becomes a more prevalent solution. Tarmac's obviously a simple solution for our colleagues in highways because it's what they understand. Roads maintenance. I think it's what they understand.
I think the point's made, Chris. I'm going to move on to the forward agenda programme, but I just want to say we're nearly at 6 o'clock, and I always make a point of trying to avoid meetings going on much more than 2 hours, because I think at that level to lose their concentration if they will to live. I'm very much aware that I said I wasn't going to have introductions of people, partly because we've got a long list of members. They're not all here, I know, and I've attended Zoom meetings where by the time everybody's introduced themselves and said something about them, the meeting's about 3/4 over the time allotted. But I would like to have an opportunity in a future meeting for people to introduce themselves. There are 1 or 2 people sitting in this room who I think I would like you all to know something about. I'm looking at you, Victor, because you've got a lot of experience you were telling me about before the meeting started to do with planning and mapping of estates. And I've also already said that I would like to have more time put aside where we bring our own ideas here and discuss them. I'm not suggesting we come with fully formed ideas and simply say, this is what the local authorities should be doing, but where we might come with half-formed ideas and play them around with each other, because that can often trigger a better idea from somebody else if somebody's got in a non-pejorative sense, half-baked idea, a half-gestated idea, perhaps. So I've said enough now, and I'll go over to you and say, what do you want on the agenda for future meetings? Anybody going to put their hand up? Angie, you moved around.
Yeah, I think I would like to add on to the agenda that most of the transport plans at the moment for local authorities seem to be focused on getting people to cycle and walk to work. As a predominantly rural community, it's just not feasible in the majority of Lincolnshire unless you happen to be lucky enough to live and work in a very close proximity. Most of us don't. That isn't the case. So therefore, most of the access in Lincolnshire has to have surely its main focus on leisure, because most of us are walking, cycling, kayaking, riding or carriage driving for pleasure. It's our hobby, it's our release, it's something that keeps us fit, it's something we love to do, and we should all work together as a group, including the off-road drivers and motorcyclists, because I know there are some groups of those in Lincolnshire, and none of us are really well, we haven't got a cohesive plan, shall we say. So I think the local access forum would be a brilliant vehicle, if I can use the word vehicle, for us all to get together. So maybe if we think about what we, each of us, want for our individual hobbies, and maybe put an email down to Rob or Chris in the meantime, ready to formulate something for the next meeting.
There are 3 people got their hands up now. I'm not sure who had them up first, so I'll go for Sharon first.
I was going to say something similar to what Angie has just said. You know, please, Rights of Way team, don't assume that everybody goes out for a walk in towns, and just don't, you know, don't resurface our rural bridleways, footpaths and everything else, just for the sake of pleasing a different user group, shall I say? Does that make sense?
Okay, Sid's, you hands up, Sid Mill.
Yes, on the subject of introductions, where there's a list of members of the forum, I would suggest that we actually put the group that we represent, rather than say a user of, you know, a user of public rights of way or something.
Chris Mill is gesticulating to me. He wants to speak, but I know what he's going to say. That is, the legislation actually is framed so that we are not representatives of organisations. We are representatives of areas of interest. So there might be a bit of a conflict there, but I'll ask Chris.
If that's the case, then you know, that's acceptable. That's unfortunately.
Yeah. That's absolutely right, Chairman. Yeah. We're not allowed to sit here and say we're a representative of the Ramblers Association. We might be a member of it, but we have to think of all walkers, but we do have we are chosen for our particular areas of either expertise or of interest, but we do not represent individual organisations.
How about then just as a sort of generic, you know, walker or, you know,
you can do
riders or something like that.
It just
gives us an idea of who's doing what and what areas.
That's absolutely what we should do. Areas of interest.
Yes.
Don't represent particular organisations. That's it.
And also on the list of people attending the meeting, I'm a guest apparently, where others aren't. Is there a reason that I'm showing as a guest?
Well, that's a technical question I have to pass on to other people to answer. Can you answer that, Robert?
Could you repeat the question, please?
On the list of people attending the meeting, some of us are called guests and some are just down as people. I just wondered whether there's a, you know, difference between a guest and an ordinary attender.
Well, that's just a quirk of Microsoft Teams, depending on if they're on our network or if they're joining externally.
I see. I understand that. Thank you very much.
I just want to try and bring together this question of forward agenda programme. We've had a discussion about it, and I don't think anyone else is wanting to speak. But one way of doing this would be to people to email in to. I suppose you would have to handle that, Robert. I think. Who actually acts as the hub of our email communications?
Yeah, so if members wanting to email through items to me, I'll be in correspondence with Chris and we can formalise them. And then, of course, they'll be represented in the minutes.
Yeah, I think what would be useful if people say anything they want to talk about, and we can kind of thrash out, hopefully a lot of you will do it, and we kind of thrash out how we can have how we can title the agenda items that cover everything. But I really would like to have things that come from the members. That's not a criticism of the officers, because it's to some extent there's a vacuum, and there are things, of course, that we do need to be updated on, as we've heard. I seem to have reached the end of that item, unless any of you wish to say anything more at the moment. And there will only be one more item left, which is to choose a date and time of the next meeting.
Could I just say, Mr. Chairman, just that when we are considering things, that the vehicle rights of way users do tend to get sidelined. I do quite understand that, but to the rest of the forum, that we want to work alongside you to be recognised a little bit, please.
And I think that is what the forum should be for, is what it's supposed to be for, and that's what we should all be doing, all working out how to work alongside each other.
Thank you.
Do we have a date already penciled in? We usually have a penciled in one for.
I don't think we do, Chairman, on the basis it's been so long since we had the last one. So I think it was a little bit up in the air as to when we were having this one. We were waiting until the legislation allowed face-to-face, albeit there's only 4 of us here.
Well, I would hope we're getting back to having the same sort of frequency that we had before. Is that acceptable? What? Yeah, well, I think 4 originally, but I think, well, we can decide. But we haven't had one for a long time. We can have one. Well, yeah, I know. Does anybody have any feelings about how long they want to wait for the next meeting?
I think, Mr. Chairman, that sorry, can I?
Sorry,
can I speak? Sorry,
you're out of my field of vision here. So, yeah,
I was just saying, as we're now going to put more into the rights of way improvement plan, that if we put things together, and it's Rob and yourself, whoever gets things in, that we should probably have a meeting to talk about those ideas.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So could we say sort of 3 to 4 months' time? Would that be too long, or for your point of view? What do you think, David? Anybody? Yeah. Chris thinks it would work well so far as the municipal timetable goes, the administrative year. Can we leave it at that then, for you to look at the diary and come up with an idea?
Sometimes late January then.
Yeah. And the next thing is location. Because we're covering the whole of Lincolnshire, we have in the past talked about all the meetings in Lincoln, because it's going to be impractical to expect people north of Lincoln to go to the south of the county and vice versa. But I have a vested interest in that I live in Lincoln, and so it's extremely convenient for me, which is very selfish of me to say it should be in Lincoln. So I'm quite happy for people to complain.
I would like to say that Lincoln is fine with myself and possibly with others because of that reason, but possibly could we have it earlier in the day for travelling to Lincoln and getting home again in reasonable time?
Yeah. In the past, we vary between evening meetings and daytime meetings, with the evening meetings in daylight in the summer. So I think that's what we'll try and do, isn't it, Chris? Would I be right in thinking that 4 o'clock in the afternoon is a pretty inconvenient time, because it's neither one thing nor the other? I can see some nodding heads there. Yeah.
Is Horncastle a good suggestion for some of the meetings as a venue?
It was certainly one of the locations when we were setting up a wider geographical area for the forum. Just this time round, though, we wanted to make sure we had the opportunity of being able to deliver a hybrid between face-to-face and those of you on screen. We won't have that opportunity in other locations around the county, so it would make it more restrictive in terms of it would become a face-to-face one only, which is fine, because it'd be nice to see you all in the whites of your eyes when you give me on things.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to leave it for the officers to come up with suggestions, depending on what's available. Of course, there's a lot of certain amount of technical problem with this. Yeah. If everybody's happy, then I'm going to about to close the meeting unless anyone wants to raise anything else. Yep. I'll thank you very much for your attending, and thank you for your patience and the remarkable lack of complaints about the technical problems we had at the beginning. You're all very tolerant. Perhaps you're used to it.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Right.
Bye.
Thanks, all.